spring water, mineral water, purified water. On the shelf, those labels can look like simple branding choices. But they are not all answering the same question. One is mainly about source. One is about source plus natural mineral profile. And one is mainly about treatment. That is why this category often feels more confusing than it first appears. People are not just buying water. They are trying to interpret what the label is telling them. So in this video, let's walk through this clearly. What each of these terms actually means, what the label is and is not telling you, where the differences really come from, and what matters in practice when you are choosing between them. A useful place to begin is with one simple idea. These three labels are not built on one single logic. Spring water is largely a source identity. Mineral water is a source and composition identity. Purified water is mainly a process identity. That single framework already clears up a lot, because many people compare these waters as if they are three versions of the same thing. But in practice, the labels are describing different aspects of the product. So let's start with spring water. Spring water is generally tied to an underground source. In regulatory terms, the key idea is that the water comes from an underground formation and flows naturally to the surface. That source identity matters. The label is pointing you to where the water comes from. That does not mean every bottle is telling a romantic story about untouched wilderness. It means the category is anchored to a specific kind of source. In some systems, spring water may be collected directly at the spring or through a connected borehole that taps the same underground formation. So when you see spring water on a label, the first thing to understand is this. The label is mainly telling you about origin. Now, that still leaves an important question. Does spring water automatically mean high minerals? Not necessarily. Does it automatically mean better? Not necessarily. Does it automatically mean completely untreated in the way consumers often imagine? Again, not necessarily. What it means most clearly is that the source claim is central. From there, the picture becomes clearer when we move to mineral water. Mineral water is not just water with some minerals in it. That is one of the biggest oversimplifications in this category. Under formal definitions, mineral water is tied not only to an underground source, but also to a certain mineral content and a relatively stable mineral profile at the source. In other words, the minerals are part of the identity of the water, not just a casual afterthought. That matters because almost all drinking water contains some dissolved substances. So the phrase mineral water is not simply saying, this water has minerals. It is saying something more specific about the nature of the source and the consistency of the water coming from it. In U.S. labeling rules, for example, mineral water must contain at least a certain level of total dissolved solids, and the minerals cannot just be added later to create the category. That is an important distinction. So if spring water is mainly telling you where the water comes from, mineral water is telling you both where it comes from and that its natural mineral composition is part of the category itself. That also helps explain why mineral water often has a more noticeable taste. Different minerals can affect mouthfeel and flavor. Some waters taste softer. Some taste sharper. Some feel almost neutral. Others have a stronger mineral signature. And this is where consumers often start mixing up category meaning with quality judgment. A stronger mineral taste does not automatically mean a water is universally better. It means the mineral character is more noticeable. For some people, that is a positive. For others, it is not. So at this point, we have two categories that are both connected to source, but in different ways. Spring water is mainly source-defined. Mineral water is source-defined plus composition-defined. Now we come to purified water, which works on a different logic. Purified water is mainly about treatment. The label is telling you that the water has gone through a purification process such as reverse osmosis, distillation, deionization, or a similar method. That means purified water is not primarily selling you a natural source story. It is primarily identifying the processing approach. This is one of the most useful clarifications in the whole topic, because many consumers compare purified water to spring water as if one is natural and the other is fake. That is too simple to be useful. A clearer way to understand it is this. Purified water is a process category. The label highlights what has been done to the water. That often means the final water has had many dissolved substances reduced or removed. Depending on the process and the product, the result may taste very neutral or clean in a plain, low-character way. That is not an insult. It is simply part of what many purified waters are designed to be. And that also explains why purified water and mineral water can feel so different to drink. One category often emphasizes removal and refinement. The other emphasizes a naturally present mineral profile that remains part of the identity. So rather than asking which one is the real water, it helps to ask, what is this label actually trying to describe? Source? Natural composition? Or treatment process? That question is much more useful than relying on marketing mood. At this point, we can make the core comparison very simple. Spring water, primarily about where it comes from. Mineral water, about where it comes from and the natural mineral composition that defines it. Purified water, primarily about how it was treated. Once you see that, the shelf starts to make more sense. But there is another important layer here. These words do not always travel perfectly across every country and every market. Some definitions are shaped by national regulation. Some are shaped by regional rules. Some are used more loosely in everyday conversation than they are in formal labeling systems. That means consumers should be careful about assuming that every bottle in every country is operating under identical category logic. This is especially important with mineral water. In some places, there are stricter recognition systems for natural mineral waters. In others, consumers may use the phrase more casually. So the safest documentary-style approach is not to pretend there is one global wording system with no variation. Instead, the better view is this. The broad logic is understandable, but the exact legal framework can vary. Now let's bring this down to real-life buying decisions. When most people reach for one of these waters, they are usually responding to one of a few practical concerns. Taste, source preference, processing preference, habit, price, and sometimes trust in a certain type of label. If taste matters most to you, mineral profile may matter more. If you prefer a very neutral taste, purified water may be closer to what you want. If source identity matters to you, spring water may feel more meaningful. But those are preference frames, not universal rules of superiority. And that is an important tone to keep. This is not really a best versus worst category. It is a what does this label actually mean category. That shift makes the whole topic more practical. Because once you stop looking for a dramatic winner, you can start reading the bottle more intelligently. What is the actual water type? Is the label emphasizing source, treatment, or both? Is the mineral profile likely to affect taste? Is this a category term, a processing term, or mostly a marketing mood? Those questions are much more useful than simply asking whether the water sounds premium. Another point worth understanding is that regulation and safety do not disappear just because bottled water labels sound natural or premium. Bottled water still sits inside a regulated framework. So the meaningful comparison is not fantasy versus science. It is category identity versus process identity versus consumer interpretation. That is where the subject becomes more interesting. Because the confusion is not really about water itself. It is about labels answering different questions while sitting side by side on the same shelf. One bottle is saying, look at the source. Another is saying, look at the source and the natural mineral character. Another is saying, look at the purification process. Once you understand that, a lot of the shelf confusion starts to fall away. So if we bring everything together, the clearest summary is this. Spring water is mainly about origin. Mineral water is about origin plus naturally defining mineral content. Purified water is mainly about treatment. None of those labels, by themselves, automatically settles every question about quality, taste, preference, or suitability for every person. But they do tell you what kind of claim the bottle is making. And that is the most useful way to read them. Not as 3 status levels. Not as 3 marketing personalities. But as 3 different category signals. So the next time you see spring water, mineral water, and purified water side by side, the goal is not to memorize a slogan. It is simply to ask, what kind of information is this label trying to give me? If you can answer that, the category becomes much easier to understand. And once the category becomes clearer, the buying decision usually becomes clearer too.